The mansion in Beverly Hills shimmered like a jewel under the soft glow of chandeliers. The air was thick with laughter, the clink of crystal glasses, and the subtle hum of classical music floating through the room like perfume. Politicians, business tycoons, and their exquisitely dressed wives glided across the marble floor, their conversations polished, and their smiles even more so. This wasn't just a party, it was a demonstration of power. And yet, moving like a shadow between these giants of wealth and influence, was a 17-year-old boy with eyes too sharp for his age. Diego Santos. Dressed in a crisp white shirt and black vest, he carried a silver tray with the quiet dignity of someone who knew what it meant to be overlooked. His movements were precise. His silence was deliberate. He didn't belong here, and yet, in some deeper, invisible way, he did. From the far side of the room, near the grand piano, Victoria Whitman sipped from her wine glass and watched Diego with the idle curiosity of a lion eyeing a mouse. Her voice, sharp and deliberate, cut through the air. "Come here, boy. How about showing me how you play chess in the slums?" The laughter that followed was restrained, elegant, and poisonous. Carmen, Diego's mother, stood frozen a few feet away, gripping her tray. Her knuckles turned white. She had worked in this house for 20 years, cleaning marble floors that were never dirty, polishing mirrors that already sparkled, raising her son alone while being invisible to the very people who laughed now. Victoria smiled, the kind of smile that dripped with superiority. "I'm sure he can move the pieces," she said, gesturing toward the ornate Italian marble chessboard resting on the glass coffee table. "Let's see what this boy can do against someone who's actually studied the game." "Bet he doesn't even know the knight moves in an L shape," murmured Mr. Hamilton, owner of 3 hotel chains, to his wife. They both chuckled behind their $1,000 flutes. The laughter spread through the room like a ripple of entitlement. But Diego said nothing. He stood still, eyes scanning not the board, but the people. Their eyes, their smirks, their hands wrapped around stemmed glasses. At 17, he had already learned that silence could be louder than any voice. And in that moment, his silence said everything. There was something strange in the way he stood. The guests noticed it too, an unnatural stillness, like the air just before a storm. His fingers twitched slightly at his side, as if they were playing invisible moves on an invisible board. "Of course, Mrs. Whitman," Diego said finally, his voice calm and smooth. "It would be my pleasure." Victoria raised an eyebrow, pleased. She settled into the leather armchair beside the board, folding one leg over the other like a queen waiting to be entertained. "Excellent. I bet you've never played on a board like this, have you? Genuine Italian marble. Each piece worth more than, well, you know." State Representative Jennifer Mills, sitting near the bay window, tilted her head. "Victoria, are you sure this isn't a little cruel?" "Nonsense," Victoria replied, adjusting a diamond earring. "It's educational. He'll be able to tell his friends back home that he played chess in a real mansion." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Diego had spent the last 8 years devouring every book, every video, every scrap of information on chess he could find. While the other kids in his neighborhood played video games, Diego studied grandmasters. He spent hours watching matches on a broken second-hand computer, staying up late into the night with no internet, sometimes with only a candle for light because the electricity had been cut again. He had memorized more than 200 openings. He could recite the 50 most famous defenses in chess history by heart. What Victoria thought would be entertainment was about to become an unforgettable humiliation. As Victoria began arranging the pieces with theatrical flair, Diego's eyes wandered around the room again. He wasn't just preparing for a match. He was preparing to rewrite every assumption in that room about who deserved respect. Victoria took white, of course. "I always play white, dear. It's a family tradition," she said, without irony. She ignored the fact that in real chess, the color is assigned randomly, not chosen by tradition. Diego said nothing. He simply arranged the black pieces with a kind of practiced grace that made Mr. Hamilton frown. Every piece was placed in the exact center of its square, perfectly aligned, as if he had done this hundreds of times before. Because he had. "Let's make this interesting," Victoria announced, turning to the guests. "If the boy manages to give me even one scare, I'll donate $1,000 to, I don't know, some public school." More laughter. But Diego looked up and smiled, a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Carmen, still standing in the corner, felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that smile. It was the same smile he wore when teachers told him he couldn't solve advanced problems, and then he aced them. The same smile he had at 12 when he stopped asking her for help with homework and quietly began teaching himself. Victoria opened with a pawn to e4. "Indian king, dear. A classic opening. We learned it at Harvard," she added condescendingly, as though explaining shoelaces. Diego answered instantly, "C5, the Sicilian defense." The room shifted, not dramatically, but enough. A few guests exchanged glances. Jennifer Mills leaned forward in her seat. That wasn't the move of someone who merely knew how to move the pieces. That was theory. Victoria faltered for a moment, then played knight to f3. She was following some sequence she had memorized, perhaps from a club or class years ago. But Diego saw it instantly. She didn't understand what she was doing. She was just remembering patterns. 8 years earlier, Diego had found a torn chess book in a trash bin behind the local library. He had hidden it in his backpack and read it under his blanket by flashlight. "Why chess?" his mother had asked, exhausted from working 2 jobs. "Because the rich kids think it makes them smarter than us," he'd said. There had been no money for lessons, no computer, no coach. But there had been the public library. 3 kilometers every day, dusty books no one touched, and a boy who had decided that the game of kings could belong to anyone. Victoria moved her pawn to d3, a timid, conservative move. Diego responded with knight to c6, executing it in less than 3 seconds. "Our little boy is moving too fast," Victoria said with a smirk. "In real chess, you think before you play." That's when Diego made his first psychological strike. He paused, pretended to think, let the silence stretch, then moved his pawn to g6. To the untrained eye, it was meaningless. But Mr. Hamilton, who hadn't played in decades, leaned in. "Victoria," he said under his breath, "he's setting up a fast dragon." "A what?" she scoffed. "A variation of the Sicilian. Quite sophisticated." She laughed, brushing it off. He must have seen it in a movie. But she wasn't laughing for long, because with each move, it became clear. Diego wasn't just playing back. He was controlling the rhythm. Every piece, every placement, every response was as calculated as it was fluid. The board was turning into a map of her defeat. And she had no idea it had already begun. "Kasparov taught you?" Hamilton asked, incredulous, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not personally," Diego replied, calmly moving his queen into position. "But I studied all his documented games, 1,183 to be exact." The guests leaned forward. The move Diego had just made wasn't just clever. It was historic. It was a replica of a famous Kasparov sequence from the 1984 World Championship against Karpov, Game 23, a match studied by only the most devoted players. Victoria's eyes darted from the board to the faces around her. But instead of laughter or admiration, all she saw now was disapproval, unspoken, heavy, icy. For the first time in her life, Victoria Wittmann wasn't the most powerful person in the room. She was a woman slowly unraveling before an audience that was no longer clapping. From the side of the room, Carmen stepped forward. Her voice, soft but unshaken, rang out. "My son wakes up every morning at 5 a.m. to study before school. He walks 6 miles to the library because we couldn't afford internet. When our lights were cut off, he studied by candlelight while I worked double shifts just to put food on the table." The silence in the room was absolute. The kind of silence that bends gravity, that makes people look away, ashamed. Diego turned to look at his mother. His eyes held a quiet, burning love that pierced the air like a blade. Then, with the calmness of a storm that's already made landfall, he said, "Checkmate." He placed his queen. Victoria stared at the board, unblinking, disbelieving, her breath shallow, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the fallen king. It was impossible, unacceptable, unforgivable. Her face, moments ago glowing with smugness, now flickered with a panic she couldn't control. She looked up at Diego, still seated, still calm, still watching her with the kind of quiet composure that screamed louder than any insult. The energy in the room shifted entirely. No one looked at Diego as a servant anymore. They looked at him as something else, something rare, something extraordinary, something they would tell stories about. And they looked at Victoria Wittmann the way one looks at someone who just slipped and fell in a ballroom wearing a gown too expensive to stain, with embarrassment and disappointment. But what Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that this defeat wasn't the end. It was only the beginning, the first broken tile in a floor she'd built her life upon. She reached out, fingers brushing against the fallen king, as though hoping it would come alive and take back the move. That was luck," she muttered, but her voice cracked. "He must have memorized that specific sequence. Someone must have trained him." Hamilton stood up from his chair and walked toward the board. "Victoria," he said, his voice firmer than usual, "that boy just executed a variation of the Sicilian I haven't seen in 40 years of playing." And he did it without blinking. Across the room, Congresswoman Mills had her phone half hidden in her lap. She wasn't texting. She was recording. Politicians know when they're witnessing something that's going to go viral. A rich woman being humiliated by the son of her maid wasn't just a story. It was a moment. Victoria shot to her feet, knocking over the side of the board. A knight clattered to the floor. "I don't accept this," she snapped. "Something's wrong here. This was a setup. Someone coached him. This was all designed to humiliate me." Still seated, Diego looked up at her with the same steady gaze. "Would you like a rematch?" he asked softly. "I can play with anyone here. Or all of them at once, if you prefer." A gasp rustled through the crowd. No one laughed, because no one thought he was joking. "You're being arrogant now," Victoria snapped, her voice trembling with rage and humiliation. "A boy from the slums doesn't talk to his superiors like that." That's when Carmen stepped forward again. Her voice didn't shake. "Mrs. Wittmann," she said, looking Victoria directly in the eye for the first time in 20 years, "my son is not from the slums. We come from a working-class community. And he is not being arrogant. He is being honest. Something you clearly cannot be about yourself." The guests looked from one woman to the other. The air in the room was tight, unforgiving. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Victoria barked. "Have you forgotten your place in this house?" "I haven't forgotten anything," Carmen replied, but I remembered my worth. Hamilton stepped in, shifting uncomfortably. Victoria, maybe it's time we acknowledged something here. The young man is talented, truly. But Victoria was too far gone. No, she said, laughing bitterly. You don't get it. This was all planned. Someone trained him just to humiliate me. At that, Diego rose to his feet. And when he spoke, his voice filled the room, not by volume, but by truth. Mrs. Whitman, I wasn't trained to humiliate you. I studied chess for 8 years because I fell in love with it. I dreamed of playing it against people who respected the game. People who believed talent had no color, or class, or last name. He looked around the room, one face at a time. When you invited me to show you how I play in the slums, I thought this would be my chance to earn your respect. But now I understand. You never wanted a fair match. You wanted a spectacle. You wanted to humiliate me before I even sat down. Congresswoman Mills had stopped recording. She wasn't going to miss a single word of this. How old are you? She asked softly. 17, Diego replied. And how long have you been playing chess seriously? 8 years. Mills turned her gaze to Victoria. You've just been defeated, she said quietly, by a self-taught teenager. A teenager whose family you employ? A teenager you invited to play because you thought it would be funny. Victoria's mouth opened, closed. She couldn't breathe through the shame, through the sheer magnitude of what she had just done in front of the very people whose approval she had always craved. I didn't know he played seriously, she stammered, but her voice was small, shrinking. The issue isn't whether he plays seriously, Hamilton said, his tone curt now. The issue is you assumed he'd be easy to beat. Because he's your maid's son. Because he's black. Because he doesn't wear $1,000 shoes. Diego began gently putting the pieces back into place. Each click of wood on marble sounded like a final judgment. Thank you for the game, Ms. Whitman, he said. It was educational. He turned to his mother. Mom, can we go? I have school tomorrow. Carmen nodded, untying her apron and folding it carefully. Before they left, she looked back one last time. Mrs. Whitman, she said quietly, thank you. Tonight, you showed me that my son deserves to be in far better places than this. They turned and walked toward the door. Diego, Congresswoman Mills called out, are you interested in scholarships? I know a few universities that would love to meet someone like you. Diego stopped, smiled, the first genuine smile of the night, and said, Very interested, ma'am. Behind them, Victoria stood frozen in place, watching her carefully constructed world collapse in less than an hour. Her friends didn't look at he Mills handed him a card. Call me Monday. Behind them, Victoria stood frozen in place, watching her carefully constructed world collapse in less than an hour. Her friends didn't look at her. No one came to her defense. One by one, they began to leave. Cold goodbyes. Avoided eye contact. No sympathy. By the time the door closed behind Diego and Carmen, Victoria was alone in her mansion. And at her feet, the king still lay fallen. The morning after the chess match, Beverly Hills felt quieter than usual. But inside Victoria Wittmann's mansion, silence was suffocating. Not the elegant kind that comes with wealth and space, but the kind that follows humiliation. The kind that turns walls into mirrors and every reflection into a reminder of what you've lost. She sat alone in the same leather armchair where her downfall had begun. The chessboard, still set up from last night, taunted her from across the coffee table. Every piece was back in its place, reset, but she knew nothing would ever feel the same again. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since sunrise. First it was Hamilton, texting only 3 words, You created that. Then it was the local press. Someone had leaked details of the night. Probably one of the guests. Maybe Mills. Maybe Hamilton himself. And now headlines were flooding every platform. Maid's son destroys Beverly Hills millionaire in live chess game. Racist dinner party backfires spectacularly. Prodigy from the slums teaches billionaire a lesson in respect. Worst of all, Congresswoman Mills had gone public. She'd posted the full story, every detail, every quote, every cold truth. No video, just words. That was all it took. Within hours, it had gone viral. 3 million views, thousands of comments, most of them brutal. This boy is a legend. She invited him to embarrass him. He made her irrelevant. Give Diego Santos every scholarship in the world. Now, Victoria Whitman just became the villain of America's favorite underdog story. Victoria's phone rang again. The country club. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She already knew what it meant. When she finally opened the email, it was worse than she imagined. Membership terminated. Due to unfortunate public conduct. A polite way of saying, you're a PR disaster now. By noon, 3 charities had removed her from their donor boards. Sponsors dropped out of her upcoming fundraiser. Even her florist canceled future orders. We're focusing on more inclusive clients now, they said, almost mockingly. And Hamilton? He had unfollowed her on every platform. Worse than the humiliation was the silence of the people she once thought loyal. No defense, no excuses, no one even asking for her side. Because deep down, they knew the truth. She had invited a child to be humiliated. And he had destroyed her, gracefully, brilliantly, and completely. At that very moment, across town, Diego Santos sat on a bus. The city passed by in streaks of concrete and sunlight as he clutched a worn-out backpack on his lap. Inside was Congresswoman Mills's card, a small notebook filled with chess positions, and a sandwich his mother had packed with a quiet pride she'd never shown before. Carmen sat beside him. She was still in her hotel uniform, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence between them was peaceful. Not awkward, not heavy, but sacred. They had crossed a line in life that could never be uncrossed. "Mijo," she said, finally, her voice soft. "You really did it." Diego looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "No, Mama. We did it." They arrived at a small public library in the heart of the city. Not the clean, brightly lit ones near the rich neighborhoods. This one had flickering lights and outdated computers. But it was sacred ground to Diego. The place where it all began. He went straight to the 3rd shelf in the back, 2nd row from the top, the place where, 8 years ago, he'd found a torn book in the trash bin outside. The Art of Attack in Chess. He knew the title by heart. He even remembered the page that changed his life, page 54, where a young Bobby Fischer sacrificed a rook to win a queen. That was the day Diego stopped dreaming of surviving and started planning to win. He didn't take the book down. He didn't need to. Instead, he opened his notebook and began drafting the outline of something new. A project, an idea. Freechess.org, he wrote at the top. A program for kids from communities like his. No coaches, no money, no problem. He would teach them what he'd taught himself. Chess as survival. Chess as strategy. Chess as power. Later that evening, Mills kept her promise. She called. "Stanford's Office of Admissions is expecting your application," she said. "And not just them. MIT, Yale, Princeton. Anywhere you want to go, Diego. They know your name now." Diego didn't speak right away. "I don't have the money for applications," he said eventually. "You don't need it," Mills replied. "It's all covered. You've already paid in full, with Checkmate, As she hung up, Carmen stepped into the room with her apron still tied. Her eyes scanned his face. "What did she say?" Diego smiled, slow and real. "She said, 'We're in.'" The next morning, as he stepped into his school, Diego didn't notice the stairs right away. But he felt them. The hallways were whispering. Students who had never spoken to him before nodded silently. Teachers paused when they saw him, offering quiet, respectful smiles. It wasn't about the chess game. It was about what he represented now. Proof. Proof that talent didn't need permission. Proof that hard work, even in darkness, left footprints that could lead to light. Proof that even a maid's son could teach a mansion of billionaires what real class looked like. And somewhere, in a house that now felt too large and too empty, Victoria Whitman stood in front of the mirror, searching her reflection for the power she once wore like perfume, but it was gone. Because that night, Diego hadn't just taken her king. He'd taken her crown. 6 weeks after the match, Diego Santos no longer belonged to a forgotten corner of the city. He belonged to headlines. He belonged to hope. His name was on billboards in parts of Los Angeles where no one had ever heard of Beverly Hills, except as a place you were never meant to enter. But now, kids in Compton, Watts, and East L.A. walked into school talking about pawns and endgames instead of rap battles and basketball stats. Because of him. Because a 17-year-old boy had walked into a mansion meant to humiliate him and turned it into the birthplace of a legend. The media couldn't get enough. CNN aired a segment titled, "The Boy Who Checkmated Beverly Hills." The New York Times ran a Sunday profile, "A Pawn No More, How Diego Santos Rewrote the Rules." Oprah called. So did Ellen. So did Stanford. But Diego didn't chase the spotlight. He chased something bigger. Every afternoon, after finishing his schoolwork, he walked to a small community center in East Hollywood, where the staff gave him a corner room, a rickety whiteboard, and exactly 12 plastic chess sets. It was enough. Kids started showing up. First just 3, then 10, then 30. Some came with their younger siblings on their hips. Some brought their fathers, exhausted men with hard hands and eyes too tired to dream. But they all came, because word had spread. The boy who beat a billionaire was giving free lessons. He didn't just teach chess. He taught hunger, discipline, silence, patience. He taught them how to look at a board and see more than pieces, how to see traps, futures, battles won before they were even fought. He taught them what no school ever could, that life is a game played in 64 squares, and if you learn the rules, you can rewrite the outcome. Meanwhile, Victoria Whitman was drowning. The humiliation didn't die down. It metastasized. Clips of the story made it to TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, cut, remixed, dramatized. One video titled, "When Arrogance Gets Checkmated," hit 12 million views. Someone had even created a short animation of her losing the game. Her character exaggerated with a giant pearl necklace, collapsing as Diego calmly moved his queen. Even worse, someone found a photo from her high school yearbook, paired it with the words, "This aged well." She became a symbol, not of wealth or grace, but of what happens when privilege forgets it's not the same as power. Her housekeeper quit. Her interior designer refused to answer her calls. A planned fundraiser with celebrity chef Anton Dupre was canceled without explanation. One charity emailed to politely request she no longer use their name in her social bio. Every door she knocked on quietly closed behind her. But her worst moment came when her own daughter, Vivian, visiting from New York, confronted her in the kitchen. "You used to teach me about fairness," Vivian said, her voice low. "Now the whole world sees what you really are." Victoria didn't respond. She just poured herself another glass of wine. Her hands still trembled when she passed the empty chessboard. Meanwhile, Diego got his acceptance letter. Stanford, full ride, engineering major, honors program, housing covered, meals covered, books covered. But what Diego cared about most was the handwritten note at the bottom, signed by the university's president. We would be honored to have someone with your discipline, intelligence, and character join us. You are the future we want to build. Carmen cried the day the letter arrived. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She just held him and whispered, "You've already made me prouder than any mother could ever hope." He held her tighter. But Diego wasn't done. The same night the letter arrived, he launched freechess.org, officially. The site was simple, black and white, like a chessboard. It opened with the words, "You don't need money to be brilliant. You just need someone to believe in your mind." Within 72 hours, over 1,200 kids had signed up. Volunteer mentors flooded in, from retired grandmasters to college players. Some came from Harvard, others from Haiti. Some were CEOs, others were single moms. But all of them had one thing in common. They saw themselves in Diego, and they wanted to pass it on. Carmen couldn't believe it when CNN returned to film a follow-up. This time, the story wasn't just about the match. It was about the movement. Inside the community center, they filmed Diego walking among rows of children, gently correcting postures, asking quiet questions, teaching them how to hold the board in their minds before they ever moved a piece. At the end of the interview, the reporter asked, "Do you think you'll ever speak to Victoria Whitman again?" Diego paused. "I don't think she needs to hear from me," he said. "I think she's already heard everything she needed to. The board spoke loud enough." "And do you hate her?" the reporter asked. Diego smiled softly, the same calm expression from that night. "Number hating her would mean she still controls part of my game. And she doesn't. I've moved on to bigger boards." Victoria saw the interview. She watched it alone, glass of wine untouched beside her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't cry. She didn't rage. She didn't call her lawyer or her PR manager. She just watched. And when it ended, she stood in front of the mirror again. Same reflection. Same silence. Only this time, she said it out loud, "I deserved it." That sentence, spoken for no one but herself, was the beginning of something else. Not redemption. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, the first honest move she'd made in years. 2 months after launching freechess.org, Diego Santos stood in front of a crowd that stunned him into silence. It wasn't the kids this time. It wasn't even the media. It was a university auditorium filled with suits, lawyers, educators, journalists, entrepreneurs, all gathered under the banner of Equity Through Education, America's Unseen Geniuses. And Diego? He was the keynote speaker. He didn't have a suit. He wore a black polo and second-hand slacks. But when he stepped to the podium, the room quieted like a cathedral. "My name is Diego Santos," he began, voice steady, hands calm, "and I am the son of a hotel maid who raised me to believe intelligence is not a luxury." The silence deepened. "I didn't learn chess in a classroom. I learned it in the corner of a dusty library. On a broken computer, I fixed myself. I didn't play to win. I played to matter." He paused, scanning the crowd. "And one night, someone invited me into a mansion to humiliate me in front of their guests. What they didn't know was, I had spent 8 years preparing for that moment." The applause began softly. But by the time he said the final words, "Talent exists everywhere. Opportunity does not. That's what we're changing." The room was on its feet. Carmen sat in the back row, tears in her eyes, whispering, "Mi hijo." But outside that room, a much different storm was brewing. Some schools banned freechess.org from their official resource lists. Too political, they said. Too confrontational. One school board member in Texas publicly stated, "We don't want programs that make rich kids feel guilty just for being born with money." It didn't stop Diego. It fed him. He gave interviews. He met with policymakers. He published essays, not about race or revenge, but about structure, systems, and quiet exclusion. Why is a public library where brilliance hides instead of where it's found? Why do we think genius needs polish when it only needs space? He wasn't angry. He was strategic. Every word was a move on a bigger board, and America had no idea they were in check. But in the shadows of all this noise, one name had gone eerily quiet: Victoria Whitman. She hadn't appeared at any events. Her publicist had disappeared. Even her company, Whitman Interiors, had quietly shuttered its Beverly Hills showroom. Then, one foggy morning in March, she showed up at a public high school on the edge of South LA. No cameras, no entourage. She sat in the back of a chess club meeting where a volunteer mentor, one of Diego's first students, was teaching a group of Latino kids how to control the center of the board. She said nothing, but after the session ended, she approached the volunteer and asked only one question: "Where can I donate without putting my name on it?" The mentor stared at her, stunned. "You're her, aren't you?" Victoria nodded slowly. "I am, and I was wrong. About everything." That night, she sent an anonymous donation of $100,000 to freechess.org under the alias Anonymous Pawn. Diego never commented on it publicly, but Carmen found the receipt in their email inbox while helping sort scholarship letters. She held it up. "Do you think it's really her?" Diego shrugged. "It doesn't matter." "What would you say to her if you met again?" He paused, thinking, then said, "I'd say, thank you. She gave me the board." Back in Beverly Hills, Victoria didn't tell anyone about the donation. She didn't want redemption. She wanted silence. She had fired her PR team, canceled the charity galas, stopped shopping, stopped hosting, started listening. She spent hours reading comments on the video Mills had posted. The thousands of strangers who had celebrated Diego and condemned her. Some were brutal. Some were fair. But one stood out. True class is not defined by money. It's defined by the moment you realize you were wrong, and change anyway. She screenshot that one, printed it, framed it, hung it above her fireplace where the marble chessboard used to be. Meanwhile, Diego's chess program had grown into a national movement. Partnerships with public libraries. A grant from the Gates Foundation. A digital tournament with 10,000 students from underfunded schools across 22 states. Every match live-streamed, every victory celebrated. In June, Stanford flew him out early for a special orientation. He arrived with a suitcase that still had duct tape on one corner. The admissions director greeted him like visiting royalty. "You don't need to take any placement exams," she smiled. "We've already seen what you're capable of." As he walked through campus, green lawns, red roofs, quiet power, Diego didn't feel small. He felt like he belonged. But one moment stayed with him that whole first day. As he sat on a bench near the quad, a girl walked by wearing a freechess.org hoodie. She didn't recognize him. She didn't look twice. But she wore his dream like it was normal. Like chess was hers now. Like the game belonged to everyone. He smiled, because that was the win. Not the checkmate, not the headlines, not even the scholarship, but that quiet revolution, unseen, unstoppable, spreading across the country, one square at a time. By the time summer began, Diego Santos was no longer just a symbol. He was a strategist, a movement builder, an unlikely public figure whose calm voice had become a scalpel, cutting through centuries of silent assumptions. He didn't give angry speeches, he didn't call out names, but he spoke with such conviction, such clarity, that even hardened politicians had begun adjusting their language when he entered the room. It started with a Senate invitation. The Education Reform Committee wanted testimony on public library funding. Diego walked into the Capitol building in a borrowed blazer and shoes that still squeaked from the rain. A dozen senators sat in front of him, but Diego didn't flinch. He placed a single worn chess piece on the table, a black pawn. "This," he began, "is all I had when I started." They listened. When he finished, one senator asked, "Mr. Santos, what's your vision for education in America?" Diego looked at them with the calm of someone who'd planned every move. "My vision," he said, "is that every child, in every zip code, believes their mind is a gift, not a debt they have to pay for." It became a viral moment. Clips of his speech hit 20 million views in days. Hashtags trended. Number sign, from pawn to power. Santos standard. Checkmate the system. But behind all that buzz, something deeper had begun. State legislatures started passing bills to expand after-school programs. Major tech companies began donating refurbished laptops to public libraries. One Ivy League school launched a Santos scholarship for first-generation STEM students. And yet, Diego remained grounded. He kept teaching, kept mentoring, kept coding new features for freechess.org late at night from his Stanford dorm. One evening, he opened an email marked "Confidential." It was from a small private school in New York, an elite prep academy known for legacy admissions and seven-figure tuition fees. They wanted to hire Diego as a consultant, to help diversify their talent pipeline. He read the email twice, then replied, "I don't work to fit people into broken systems. I build new systems where everyone fits by default." He clicked send. Then he smiled, because that rejection felt better than any offer of money. Back in California, something unexpected was happening. Victoria Whitman was changing, slowly, awkwardly, quietly. She hadn't hosted a party in 6 months. Her social calendar was empty. She started volunteering anonymously at a local youth center, scrubbing floors, stocking shelves. No press, no selfies, just labor. Carmen heard about it from one of the hotel guests who'd recognized Victoria wearing jeans and no makeup at a soup kitchen downtown. She looked smaller, the guest had said, like someone who knew she couldn't buy back her pride. Carmen didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply returned to folding hotel sheets and whispered, "Maybe she's learning." But not everyone, believed it. Some thought Victoria was just hiding until the scandal passed, that she'd return to her old circles the moment the headlines faded. Even she didn't know yet. She still hadn't apologized to Carmen, still hadn't spoken Diego's name out loud. Until one Sunday morning, she walked into St. Mark's Church, the old one with the iron bell tower downtown. She sat in the back pew and waited until the service ended. Then she walked up to the altar and asked to speak to the priest. "I've wronged people," she said simply. "I can't undo it, but I need to understand it." The priest didn't offer forgiveness. He offered a broom, and every Sunday after that, Victoria came early, cleaned pews, wiped down hymnals, set out water. No one recognized her at first, and when they did, they didn't care. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to see. Meanwhile, Diego was facing a different challenge. The attention, though mostly positive, had started to take its toll. Emails, interviews, speaking engagements. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Everyone had ideas. One afternoon, Carmen called him. "Mi hijo," she said softly. "You're not a chessboard." He laughed. "What do you mean?" "You're not here for others to move around. Don't forget to be you." That night, Diego did something radical. He shut off his phone, walked to the edge of campus, sat under a tree with a chessboard, and played a game against himself. White versus black. Ambition versus peace. Move by move, he calmed the war inside him. And when he placed the final checkmate, a quiet, perfect trap, he looked up at the stars and whispered, "I'm still me." That moment changed him. From then on, Diego became even more precise. He said no to TV shows, no to endorsement deals, no to every opportunity that didn't align with his core purpose. Equity through knowledge. And because he said no, the world started listening even more closely to his yes. It happened on a Wednesday. At 3:42 p.m., the freechess.org servers crashed. Not from a bug, from an attack. A coordinated cyber assault wiped out 3 months of student data, thousands of match records, mentor logs, tournament brackets, everything. And with it, the rhythm of 17,000 kids who had made chess their anchor in a storm of poverty, violence, and silence. Diego found out mid-lecture. His phone lit up with messages. "The site's down. Everything's gone. Please tell me it's a mistake." His chest tightened. He left the classroom in silence, walked across campus, and locked himself in the engineering lab alone. 2 laptops, 3 external backups, nothing. Gone. By nightfall, social media caught wind. The hashtag shifted from admiration to despair. # free chess down. Our only hope gone. Santos failing. That hurt the most. Not the attack, the disappointment. Because Diego hadn't built a platform. He'd built a promise. And now it lay in digital ruins. Carmen called at 10:17 p.m. She didn't ask about the site. She didn't ask about the press. She only said, "You don't lose your value because you lost a file." He didn't respond. Not until an hour later, when he remembered something. A dusty external hard drive, one he hadn't touched since high school. He ran to his dorm closet, pulled out the old laptop Carmen had bought him secondhand 5 years ago. He plugged it in. It whirred. It groaned. It booted. And there it was, an archive copy of freechess.org from the first 6 months. Early versions, raw files. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to rebuild the spine. At 3:47 a.m., Diego began writing new code. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just typed. 3 days later, the site relaunch stunned the internet. He called it Free Chess 2.0, Resilient Edition. The login page opened with a single quote. "A true player doesn't stop after defeat. He restarts the game with deeper knowledge." But in the shadows of that victory, someone else was watching. Victoria Wittmann. The hack hadn't surprised her. She had seen enough scandal and sabotage in her past circles to know that success, especially by someone from outside the power structure, made enemies. But what did surprise her was how Diego responded. No interviews, no excuses, no tears. He just rebuilt, quietly. And for the first time, Victoria didn't feel envy or shame. She felt something deeper. Responsibility. So she did something she hadn't done in over a year. She wrote a letter. 3 drafts in, she stopped trying to sound polished. Instead, she wrote with the one thing Diego always respected: truth. To Diego Santos, this is not a request for forgiveness. I wouldn't ask that from someone I tried to reduce into a performance. This is a request for honesty. Mine. And, If you're willing, yours. I was raised in a world where power meant never apologizing, where pride lived in your voice, and shame was buried in your money. That night, I thought I was being clever, powerful, untouchable. Instead, I was small, and I made you smaller to feel bigger. You didn't just beat me at chess. You dismantled every lie I'd built around my identity, and for that, I owe you everything. I would like to meet, in person, as equals. You may say no, and I will respect it. But if you say yes, I promise to show up with no name, no defense, no pearls, just the truth. Victoria Diego read it twice, then 3 times. He didn't respond for a week, but on the 8th day, he sent 2 words. Tomorrow. Noon. The location was neutral, a public park in Santa Monica. Quiet, open, no distractions. Victoria arrived early. No jewelry, no makeup, just a black coat and a folded envelope in her hands. Diego arrived on foot. When their eyes met, neither of them smiled. They just stood in the shade of a jacaranda tree and sat on opposite ends of the bench. For a full minute, silence. Then Diego spoke. "I thought you'd come to justify yourself." "No," she said softly. "That's what I used to do." He looked at her face. Not broken, not proud, just human. Victoria took a breath. "I thought chess was about controlling the board, but you showed me. It's about understanding the player." Diego's fingers tapped the edge of the bench. "You still see people as pieces?" he asked quietly. "Some days," she admitted. "But I'm learning." He nodded. Victoria reached into her coat and handed him the envelope. Inside, a check for $500,000 made out to freechess.org. And a note. No strings. No name. Just progress. Diego looked up. "I won't use your name to promote this." "I know," she said. "That's why I trust you with it." Then she stood up. "I'm not asking you to forget," she added. "But I'm grateful you allowed me to remember who I was supposed to be." Diego stood too. And for a brief moment, as they both looked at the same tree, the same shade, the same bench, they weren't enemies or opponents or footnotes in each other's stories. They were just 2 flawed players, finally on the same side of the board. 2 years later, a little girl in Mississippi checkmated her principal during recess. The entire playground exploded in cheers. She was 8. She learned to play on freechess.org. 1 month later, a high school dropout from East Detroit was offered a full ride to MIT. Not for grades, but for demonstrating tactical analysis through chess matches that had stunned PhD-level reviewers. His first email? "Thank you, Diego." In Chicago, Houston, the Bronx, Compton, thousands of new stories began unfolding quietly. Stories of brilliance that had nothing to do with status, accent, or last name. They all shared one thing in common. They had a board, a mentor, and a belief that intelligence belongs to everyone. That belief had a name now. Santos. It wasn't just a surname anymore. It had become a standard. The Santos Method. It was studied in pedagogy programs, cited in education policy, respected in corporate boardrooms and homeless shelters alike. One child wrote in crayon on her scholarship application, "If I can think like Diego Santos, I can do anything." But Diego didn't live like a celebrity. He refused all awards except one, the National Medal of Human Advancement, awarded by the President for transforming equity into action. At the ceremony, he wore the same black polo he'd worn during his first speech. He stood at the podium and said, "Chess didn't save my life. My mother did. Chess just gave me the tools to thank her." That night, Carmen cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, from relief. For the first time, the world saw her son the way she always had. And Victoria Wittmann? She did not return to her former life. Instead, she invested the last of her inheritance in an anonymous national scholarship fund for working-class students of color, administered without her name. She took a job at a local community college as an administrative assistant, answering phones and guiding parents through financial aid forms. When asked why, she simply said, "I used to throw galas for change. Now I help people fill out the paperwork. One of them might be the next Santos, but I'll never make the mistake of underestimating a mind again." One morning, 3 years after that infamous game, Diego received a handwritten letter. It had no return address. Inside, just 5 words. "Checkmate never felt so fair." And beneath it, a tiny black pawn sketch. No signature. He smiled. He didn't need one. Years passed. FreeChess.org crossed 2 million users. The program expanded into 27 countries. It was used in prisons, in refugee camps, in elite prep academies where, for the first time, rich children were taught by the kids they used to mock. And through it all, Diego remained humble. He taught. He mentored. He learned. One day, while visiting a small rural school in Arizona, a 4th grader tugged on his sleeve. "Are you the Diego Santos?" He smiled. "Depends. What does 'the' mean to you?" The boy looked up with big eyes. "It means someone who doesn't give up when the world says no." Diego knelt beside him, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and said, "Then yes, I'm him, and so are you." Back in Beverly Hills, the mansion where it all began had been sold. Carmen and Diego never returned. Not out of bitterness, out of peace. Because they'd built something better. A home where respect was the currency, love was the architecture, and victory wasn't defined by the power to defeat, but by the power to uplift. On the wall of their modest apartment in Palo Alto, a single photograph hung. Diego, age 17, standing next to a chessboard. Across from him, Victoria Wittmann, her face pale, her pride cracked. In front of her, a fallen king. But the photo wasn't titled "The Defeat." It was titled "The Beginning." Because that's what it was. Not a checkmate, but the first move in a much larger game. A game that, thanks to Diego Santos, millions of kids now believed they could finally win. Not by pretending to be someone else, but by playing with courage, with knowledge, and with character. Exactly as they are.